Alright, so for this next video, what I want to take a look at is trying to set up images, or actually adding images to my JavaFX applications. So I've gone ahead and included a couple of things here already. So I've created a new Java file that I've called image demo. If you want to go ahead and make a project, give it the same name, image demo. Inside of this, I've added a comment so that I could keep track of this link that I'm going to be using to go and fetch one of the images that I'm going to be adding to my application. In addition to that, I've also gone ahead and added, or at least displayed, the project structure, basically just showing the folder that I've got all of these Java files inside of, as well as another image that I've added. So I've got a JPEG right here. I have this link for another JPEG image that I'm going to be fetching, and I want to be able to use these for this particular application. So in addition to getting this these two images, I want to go ahead and start setting up the actual Java program itself. So I'm going to start off with my imports. So we're going to do one for the application class, do another import for my stage and for my scene. Then I want to go ahead and do another import for a VBox. So I want to use a VBox to contain these two images. I want to display both in my application. Essentially just have one above the other. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that in as well. VBox. I then also need to go ahead and bring in my classes to display images in my JavaFX application. In order to do this, there are actually two classes that I'm going to need. So the first one that I'm going to go ahead and import is going to come from the scene package. Inside of that, there's going to be an image package that I can use. And then I'm going to go ahead and get the image class that's contained inside of that package. And you might be thinking that this first class that I'm getting, this is what I'm going to be using to actually display my images inside of my application. That's not actually the case. So this first class I'm getting, this image class, this is actually just used to be able to load images from some other location, whether that's a file that's on your computer system or some file that you found on a web page, to actually load that into the application. But it isn't actually directly used to display the image. Instead, what we need is an additional class. So we're going to do another import. This will again come from the javafx.scene.image package, so same location as the first class. This is going to be the image view class, and this image view class is what is actually used to display our images inside of our application window. Okay, and then one last thing I want to go ahead and do, since I'm going to be trying to customize this application a little bit as I get to the end of it, I want to also go ahead and include an import from the geometry class, and this is going to be to go get the position class that's inside of that geometry package. So we'll be using that to set the alignment of our application. Okay. So now that we've done all of our imports, I want to go ahead and actually start constructing the body for my class for this program. So we're going to do public class image demo. We want to make sure that this extends our application class. We'll go ahead and make a main method. We'll include a call to the launch method inside of our main method. We'll then go ahead and make the start method. Start. We'll pass in our stage. And then we can go ahead and start constructing the body of our start method and actually start implementing our JavaFX application. So the first thing that I need to do is to make sure that I actually construct two image objects. So I'm going to be using two image objects to load these two images from some other location into my program. So the first one that I want to go ahead and do, I'm going to do an image. I'll call this image1, say this is equal to a new image. And for this first one, I want to go ahead and use this pair of double quotes, and then the thing that I'm going to be putting inside of this is going to be a string that specifies two things. The string is going to specify the protocol for this particular file that I'm trying to get, as well as the actual location of that file. So the protocol in this case is going to be a file protocol, meaning that I'm going to be getting this image from some location on my computer system. So we'll do the word file and then a colon, and then the thing that comes after this colon is going to be the location of that image on my computer system. So in my case, because of the fact that I put this image at the same location as the Java file itself, all I need to do is just give it the name of that file. Okay. If you're using an IDE, say like NetBeans or Eclipse, and you want to be able to do the same thing, keep in mind that your image files need to be located in the same directory or within the same folder as if you were doing, say, some kind of text manipulation, say like with just a text file. If you think back to maybe if you're dealing with file I/O in Java, you would put those into your project directory. So not necessarily the directory that has the Java files themselves, but instead the topmost level directory of your project. That would be the default location that your program is expecting to find those files in. So as long as you make sure that your image files are at that project directory, then you can just go ahead and specify the name of the file, and it'll just immediately find it. Okay. For the next image, do this as image2. This will be equal to a new image. Again, I'll need my pair of double quotes, and now I can go ahead and grab this link that I have right here. So just need up to here. I'll go ahead and put that in. Oops. And remove that. Okay. So for the second one, what I'm doing is just using the HTTP or HTTPS protocol, basically just specifying the entire URL for an image file that I found on some website or just through some web page. And we'll just go ahead and load that into our application. Okay. So at this point now, I've got both of these images loaded. Assuming that I were to actually start executing this program, these two images would be loaded into this program. The next thing I want to go ahead and do is actually create my image views so that I can actually insert these images that I've loaded into those image views. So I'll go ahead and make an image view object. I'm going to call this IV1, so it'll just be short for image view. This will be equal to a new image view object. And the thing that I want to pass into this is going to be the image that I'm trying to load. So IV1 will hold image 1, and then my second image view, IV2. I'm going to use this to hold my second image. Okay. So the first one's going to be holding the image that I got from my computer system using the file protocol, and then the second one's going to be holding the image that I got using the HTTPS protocol from some web page. All right. And so now that I've got both of my, essentially my two controls, my two image views set up, I'm going to go ahead and make my VBox that's going to hold both of these. Go ahead and put in IV1 and IV2. So I want to make sure that the two image views are the thing that I'm putting inside of my VBox. I then want to go ahead and create my scene. So I'll say scene is equal to a new scene. We'll go ahead and put in our VBox. So the VBox is going to be the root node, and then IV1 and IV2 will be the two leaf nodes that are connected to that root node. And then I want to finish this up by setting up my stage. So I'll go ahead and set the scene to be that scene object. We'll go ahead and set the title to be, in this case, we'll say image demo. And then finally, we'll go ahead and display this by using that show method. Okay, so at this point now we've essentially set up our scene. We're using a VBox with two images, so we want to display one image from our computer system, one from a web page in this vertical arrangement. So we'll go ahead and compile and run this. So do java image demo.java. And then we'll go ahead and run it. So do java image demo. Okay, so now that we're running this, we'll notice that there's a little bit of an issue with the way that the content is being displayed right now. So in much the same way as we saw with our HBox, EBox, and grid pane, we'll need to do a little bit of customization to kind of modify the way that the content is being displayed by kind of resizing the controls, in this case the images, and maybe also modifying the dimensions of the application window itself. In this case right now, because the images are so large, they don't actually both fit on my screen for my laptop. The length and the height for the application window is basically as much as it can possibly be without actually just full screening it. But the main issue that we're seeing right now is that the two images are a bit too large to be properly displayed on my laptop screen. So what we need to do is probably go ahead and modify the height and the width of these two images. So this seems like a pretty good place to start with trying to sort of recustomize or kind of modify the content for this application. So then the question is, how exactly do we go about doing that? So what we need to do is find some way to modify the dimensions, say like the height and the width. So to do this, once we've created these two image views, we want to go ahead and introduce some methods that allow us to manually redefine the height and the width to whatever values we might want. So to demonstrate this with one of these images, we'll take IV1, so the first image that is being displayed, and we're going to go ahead and modify the height and the width of this. And to do that, we have two methods available. So the first is going to be to modify the width. We have setFitWidth, and then we provide some kind of value for this. So let's say that we want to try to make this a fair bit smaller than it currently is. So say something more like 300 for the width, and then maybe you want to do something kind of similar for the height. So we'll do 300 for the height as well. Okay. So let's go ahead and, oops, this should be for IV1. So for the height, we're going to use setFitHeight, and we'll go ahead and modify each of these two dimensions to be 300 by 300. So it's effectively just going to make a square out of that content. So one of the things to note about this, when we initially displayed this image in the application, we saw that based on the dimensions, it's not a perfect square. So let's see what happens whenever we modify it in this way. So we'll go ahead and compile it and run it. And so you can see now it's going to be in this small little corner right here. So that looks pretty good. Admittedly, this actually looks pretty reasonable. Let's try the same thing with this this other image that we have here. So we'll go ahead and give it, say, the same dimensions. So this is IV2. We'll set its width to 300, and we'll set its height to 300 as well. Okay, so in both cases, we're going to just make them perfect little squares, 300 by 300. We'll see what kind of effect that has. And as we saw from the dimensions on this one, this is much longer than it is tall. So we'll go ahead and close that. Go ahead and recompile that. Run that. Okay, so now we've got both images displaying here, but you might not be able to tell very easily. But if we look in certain spots, say like in this area right here, maybe a little bit along the trees right here in the background, you can kind of notice that there seems to be a bit of distortion, a bit of stretching with the way that this image is being displayed. And the reason for that is because of the fact that we've tried to resize this in such a way that the ratio between the height and the width didn't really stay consistent from what it was originally to what we've changed it to. You're probably familiar with this. This is what's known as the aspect ratio of an image. Generally, whenever you try to resize an image, you either make it smaller or larger. You want to do so in a way that keeps that aspect ratio consistent. So ideally, we want to try to find a way to be able to do that within our Java program as well, within our JavaFX application. So let's go ahead and close this and see if we can fix this up to handle that. So thankfully, there actually is a method built into our JavaFX library that will handle this already. So it's a part of our image view class. So if I want to go ahead and make sure that that aspect ratio is staying consistent, regardless of what I try to specify for my dimensions, we can use a method known as setPreserveRatio. And this method is going to take a Boolean. So in this case, we want to set it to true. And by setting this to true, this says, hey, I want to go ahead and preserve my aspect ratio for this particular image view. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for both of them. Just grab that method there. Again, set that to true. And there we go. So the way that this is going to work is that it's going to look at the two dimensions I've specified. So I've got a width of 300 and a height of 300 for each of these. And what it's going to try to do is pick a set of dimensions, a height and a width, that is as close to these two dimensions that I've specified as it can possibly get while still preserving that aspect ratio. So if we take a look at this, so we've got this set up, we'll go ahead and compile and run this, and we'll see that one of these images is going to be a little bit longer than the other. So you'll see a little bit of white space now. Oh, it actually resized in a slightly different way. So in this case, what it did was it resized primarily based on the width for the second image. So it actually was able to effectively preserve the width of 300 pixels that I had specified, but the height ended up being significantly modified. So I was actually able to resize in such a way that there's no white space. But as we can see, the image is a fair bit smaller than it was previously. But it also preserves its aspect ratio, so a bit of a trade-off in that sense. Okay. So ideally what I want to try to do is modify this in such a way that I can maybe not worry so much about the resizing of the image. That is to say that I don't want it to be shrunk down to be so small that you can barely see the actual image. So what I want to go ahead and do is instead of specifying both of these dimensions, I really only want to specify one. And then because I've used this method to set the preserve ratio, by relying on that method, I'm going to go ahead and just let it automatically resize the other dimension based on what I specify for one of these dimensions. So what I'm essentially going to do is remove the height for each of these two images and instead just rely on the width. And for the second image, as we saw before, if I give it a width of 300, the height ends up being fairly small. It's kind of hard to see the entire image very well. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that width a fair bit. I'm going to make it 750 instead, and then I'm just going to let it automatically modify the height as needed so that it can preserve that aspect ratio. Okay. And then one last thing I want to go ahead and start doing, in addition to adjusting the dimensions of the images themselves, I also want to go ahead and adjust a few things with the application window itself. So a couple of things include fixing the spacing for the VBox. So I don't really want the two images to be touching each other. Instead, I want to add a little bit of spacing between them. In this case, I'm going to give it 25 pixels of spacing. And then for the application window, the scene itself, I'm going to go ahead and modify this to be 1000 by 1000 so that there's also a little bit of space surrounding them. And then finally, to make sure that they actually do have space around them and not simply have them be moved or kind of pushed into a single corner, I'm going to make use out of that pause class that I had up there and go ahead and position this VBox at the center. So we'll go ahead and set the alignment for this VBox to be at the center. Okay, so by doing all of these things, we'll go ahead and compile this and execute it, and see now that the two images are kind of displayed right in the middle of the application with a little bit of space between them and with dimensions that make it fairly easy to actually see the image fairly well, I would say. Okay. So at this point, this is going to wrap up this video. In the next one, I want to talk a little bit more about buttons. In particular, I want to actually start getting into creating some functionality for our buttons. So in the next video, we'll take a look at how to do that with a simple form. We're basically going to take that first GUI application and kind of modify that so that the button that comes with it actually does something now. And then as we go through that, I want to take the time to talk a little bit more about some different scenarios where we might make use out of buttons, including how to, in addition to being able to set text, also being able to set images through button clicks. Okay.